basically see the recordings to the lectures. I will post them as they process. It takes me about a day or so to get them up to the chapters, and I'll put them in and I'll post them accordingly. Okay, under the chapters. Sometimes what happens is we maybe start on a new chapter as we're finishing one up. If that's the case, then you'll kind of see when we flip over the chapter to the next chapter, even though it might be listed under chapter 2, and we start on chapter 3, you'll see when that transition happens on the video. Okay, questions? We're good to go, guys? All right, good. So what I'm going to do is click over to full screen. And Travis was in my office hour earlier and had to hear me whine about how I dropped my tablet today and broke my screen. And so everyone say a prayer that there will be no problems. It seemed to be okay, when I checked it. It's just a matter of me having to, get this repaired, but I think we'll be okay for tonight's class, okay? All right, good. So what I generally do is start out calling out some potential point values that you can consider for the various topics that are covered in the chapter. These are just rough ideas, so you get a sense as to the weight that the examiners will put on these different things. The scale on the exam is 100 points, and you're trying to get a 75, obviously. Of those 100 points, sometimes students will add up the point values that I call out, and they'll say, well, you called out more than 100 points. That's because the examiners have more than 100 points of material to choose from, and they're going to compilate your exam with the different areas. And my exam is going to be different from Travis' exam, different from Amra's exam, different from O'Brien's exam, right? And so I'm just giving you a relative potential weight for the different areas as you go in, okay? So audit professional standards that we're going to talk about, okay? 3 points. However, you will have a research question that you have to do on your exam, and those are one of your task-based simulation. They will make you do research and make you do a keyword search and that sort of thing. So even though professional standards in and of themselves being asked directly is not a heavy area, you will have at least one task-based simulation which they'll expect you to do research, okay? Now, when we get into audit engagements, really nothing there. I mean, just give you a sense of the different types of engagements, okay? Where we will have most of our points here today is in all this area that you see here, okay? Which is dealing with reporting, okay? This is a 10-point area on the exam, okay? We're going to see that they are going to expect you to understand the structure of audit reports. So we're really going to be starting at the end. We're going to talk about the nature of audit reports, and then we come back starting in Audit 2 and start talking about accepting clients in Audit 3, internal control procedures, and so on that are necessary to support that opinion. Okay, and the reason we start with the opinion is because often we say, well, if this happens during the audit, here's the impact on the opinion. And if we haven't talked to you yet about the nature of opinions, you lose some of the understanding of that discussion. So we start with the opinions. That is a 10-point area on the exam. Okay, we'll get a little bit into subsequent events. That's about 5 points. We'll probably get to that next time. And then other information, what happens? Yes, we have our financial statements, and yes, our opinion covers the financial statements, but often there's a requirement that entities provide information that goes beyond just the financial statements. That's called supplementary information. And when that is a requirement that an entity provide that supplementary information, we're going to see that the examiners expect auditors to know how to handle that. That's fairly light though, about 2 points. And then special purpose framework for other countries, very light, maybe about 2 points on that. Not something that the examiners spend a lot of time with. Okay, so you can see, and again, the takeaway from something like this is what? Hey, you got to know the discussion of the audit reports. You got to know that cold, obviously, right? 10 points. Okay. Hey, subsequent events. Okay. We're going to have to make sure we're good with some of that. These other 3 and 2 point areas, you might look and say, oh, John's telling me I don't need to know that. That is not what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that those are areas that you really are going to probably have a few flashcards on in case you get a few of those questions, just so that those little areas don't gang up on you and get you to a point where you don't feel comfortable on your exam, okay? So that's the approach that we're going to take here. You're going to see that as we go through the material, guys, I'm going to be calling out flashcards for you. Now, when I call out flashcards, okay, you have, as part of your Becker package from Golden Gate, you have the electronic flashcards. So you should check those electronic flashcards to see if the flashcard I've suggested is maybe already prepared for you as an electronic card. If it's not, bust out a 3x5 card, write a question on the blank side, write the answer to the question on the line side that is consistent with the information that I've asked you to flashcard. Okay, we take the flashcard approach in here. And remember, I went through the how to study file with you last time. If you weren't here, you may want to revisit that. And then as you prepare to do your homework questions, you need to go and look through those flashcards that I've either asked you to make or the ones that you already had because Becker provided it for you already. Go through those flashcards and memorize them. No peeking. You have to have them memorized. And then you go and you work the multiple choice questions and the task-based simulations assigned as homework. Okay. Now, as far as homework goes, I expect you to keep in the ball game. I expect you to do the best you can to complete the homework for that chapter as we move through those chapters. If you fall a couple of modules behind, okay, we break things up into modules. If you fall a couple of modules behind, okay, don't panic, okay, just keep moving forward. I will be awarding you your homework points in this class by looking to see that you have completed the modules, okay? And if you start to fall way behind, I'm going to start to reach out to you and say, hey, what's going on? How come you're so far behind? So I do expect you to keep up with your homework. I don't expect you to be perfect, okay? The other thing that I'm gonna do is I am gonna be watching to see if you're here. So for example, I'm just looking at the list of folks that are here now. And I know that I have one student who so far is a no-show to both the introductory class and tonight's class. So that's the type of individual or the type of situation that I'll reach out to and say, hey, what's up? Okay, so don't think that it's a free ride to an A where I'm not going to be, keeping after you to keep up with what the expectations are for the course. I tend to give high grades in this class, okay? And I'm giving you high grade because my ultimate objective is for you to pass the exam. So I'm putting some pressure on you because what you don't want to do is get an A in this class and then someone is looking at your transcript thinking about hiring you, potential employer. You have an A in a CPA prep class, and then they ask you, oh, how are you doing on the exam? And your answer is, I haven't taken it yet. Then they're going to think, I wonder what's up with this person. They get an A in a class, yet they're really not achieving the objective, the learning outcome of the class. I wonder if all these other A's really mean something. Okay, so I'm putting the pressure on you to take and pass the exam by giving you an A in this class, if that makes sense, okay? Because that is the objective. Okay, any question on that? All right, good. Let's go ahead then. That's enough of all that. And let's go ahead and take a look at our discussion of professional standards, okay? And the standards that we use depend on the nature of the engagement, okay? So if we're doing an audit, okay, now an audit means that we are looking and we are giving an attest. It's an attest engagement. It's an attest on historical financial statements. Excuse me. Historical financial statements. Okay, that is an attest engagement. Here we go. I can go the whole day without sneezing. I start the class and here comes the sneeze. So hang on one second, guys. I apologize. 1 second. Okay, so what happens? We go and we look at historical financial statements. We call that an audit, okay? And we are attesting to the financial statements. Now, attesting, if you think about that word, is what? Is testify. So what the auditor is doing is they are testifying as to the fair presentation of the information contained in the financial statements. The auditor doesn't prepare the financial statements, management prepares the financial statements, and the auditor testifies that the financial statements are fairly stated. Now, we call it an audit because auditors are to be heard audibly, okay? And back in the day, you know, you look at A Christmas Carol during holiday time, you look at Scrooge and all that, and you think, gee, poor Bob Cratchit had to work long hours for low pay. Well, that was the 1800s version of a CPA firm where he was working. They called it their counting house, okay? And so what happens? The CPA profession been around for a long, long time, dating back to the 1800s. And so in those days, you know, this idea of most people being literate is somewhat new. Okay, it's only been the last, probably the last 100 years or so that we have really strived to get everybody educated, maybe 150 years, whatever. Okay, but back in the 1800s, back, you know, around Scrooge's time, a lot of people couldn't read. So what happened? Auditors would read out loud what their findings were. They would testify audibly out loud as to what their findings were. And so we call audits attest engagements on historical financial statements. Now, these audits can be done on non-public companies, which we call non-issuers. Can be done on non-public companies, which we call non-issuers, or they could be done on public companies, okay, which we call issuers. Okay, now, if you are doing an audit on a non-public company, you have to follow standards of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants Auditing Standards Board, and they call those Statement on Auditing Standards. Now, what they do is they issue these standards chronologically, but they take them and they codify them by topic. For example, we're going to be talking about reports today, and they codify all the statements on auditing standards that are issued chronologically. Any ones that relate to reports are all codified in the 500 section of the auditing standards, okay? And so when you look at the codification, they're codified with the nomenclature AU-C, that means that we're talking about what? The AICPA, Statements on Auditing Standards, but instead of calling them out by their numeric sequence historically as they come out through SAS, as they come out chronologically, we're codifying them by subject, okay? Now, if you are auditing an issuer, then you follow the standards that are promulgated by the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, otherwise known as PCAOB. Okay, so if you're auditing the financial statements, historical financial statements of a public company, you follow the PCAOB's audit standards. AS stands for audit standards. Now, when you look at the SASs, there are, hundreds of these. When you look, not 1,001s, hundreds of these is what I'm trying to say, okay? And then you look in the PCAOB standards, and they're in their 20s. And so sometimes students look at that and they say, well, gee, that's kind of interesting. Why would you have less standards covering audits of public companies than you would standards covering non-public companies? And the reason is that for the most part, the PCAOB standards point to the AICPA standards and say, you pretty much got to do what they tell you to do, unless we tell you to do something more. For example, when you're auditing a public company, there is a requirement that the auditor also render an opinion on the entity's internal control, the effectiveness of the entity's internal control. So that is something where the PCAOB comes in and says, hey, just like you do for a non-public company, you have to obtain an understanding of the internal control, et cetera, but we're going to actually require you to report on what you have understood about those internal controls. If you're dealing with a non-public company, there is no requirement that you report on those internal control. So we're going to see that as we go through the discussion, there are variations, although not a lot, but there are variations between what PCAOB says you should do and what the auditing standards say you should do. Okay, for non-public companies say you should do the auditing standards, statements on auditing standards promulgated by the AICPA. You should not be freaked out by that because it's not like there's tens and tens of differences. They come up here and there, and we're going to highlight and understand the differences and flashcard the differences as we go through. Question on that? Okay, good. Now, some entities, such as government organizations, not-for-profits, receive money from the federal government. And if they receive money from the federal government has told them, well, you're going to have your financial statements audited, but now you're going to have to follow generally accepted government auditing standards, otherwise known as GAGAS. Now we're going to get more into GAGAS in A6. Those standards are promulgated by the Government Accountability Office, GAO. That's a federal agency that the most important part of their history is that I worked for them for 26 years. No, just kidding. I worked for the GAO for many years. That's true. That's not the most important part of their history. They do a lot of different types of audits, but what the federal standards say is if you have received certain amounts of federal financial assistance by the federal government, you're going to have your financial statements audited. And when those financial statements are audited, they are audited according to the GAGAS requirements, the generally accepted government auditing standards. Now, again, students start to freak out because they're like, you mean we're going to have to learn a whole new set of standards? No. GAGAS points to a large extent to the SASs and to the PCAOB standards, okay? But again, they add on certain things that may not be covered by those set of standards. For example, if you're auditing an entity that receives federal financial assistance, the GAO standards for auditing those financial statements say that you will provide a report that will discuss your work looking at compliance with laws and regulations. Okay, so now they're bringing in the compliance with law aspect here that wouldn't necessarily be called out in a straight financial statement audit under SAS or under PCAOB. Okay. Okay, good. Now you come over and you start to look at other engagements. Okay. And what they're talking about here, other engagements are attest engagements. And you start to look at that and you say, well, wait a minute, John, I thought you just told me that an audit is an attest engagement. And that's right. I did tell you that. Okay. But some years back, we started to note that, hey, if CPAs can attest to the financial statements, then they can attest to other things, other output that is the responsibility of management that aren't necessarily the historical financial statements. For example, you could give an opinion on an entity's management discussion analysis. It's not the financial statement. It is something that supplements the financial statement, but you're still giving what? Giving an opinion on that. And so you're testifying to that, you're attesting to that. But rather than what? Confuse it and call it all attest and not indicate whether we're talking about attesting to historical financial statements or something other than the historical financial statements, they have come in with a new set of standards. We call those attestation standards. So both audits and these other engagements here are considered attest engagements, even though we're not attesting to historical financial statements. Okay. Now, for these types of engagements, we have statements on standards for attestation engagements. And then we also have statements on standards for accounting and review services, SARS, and these cover different types of attest engagements, including compilation and review of historical financial statements. We're not auditing those, we're giving a lower level of assurance on those, so we call those attest engagements, but we have a different set of standards, okay? The standards that we follow for these are AICPA standards, and notice they have also codified those by subject. And then we have this code of professional conduct. Okay, I don't see a lot of discussion about these. What's kind of interesting here is they say, well, you only have to follow these if you are members of the AICPA. And so someone thinks, oh, okay, good. I don't have to follow the code of professional conduct. I just won't join the AICPA. I don't know where my A went. Are you seeing the A up there? It's on my screen. There it is. Okay. Okay. I don't have to follow these as long as I'm not a member of the AICPA. And it doesn't work that way, because what happens is state accountancy laws tend to mirror what the AICPA's Code of Professional Conduct says. So even if you're not a member of the AICPA, they may ask you one or two questions, maybe one question about the Code of Professional Conduct that governs and it's members of the AICPA. And the AICPA figures, hey, we can ask that question because it's our frickin' exam. The AICPA is the one that writes the CPA exam. So they think it's okay to ask you a question or two about Code of Professional Conduct. The good news is that they're pretty much mirrored by most of the state's state accountancy laws. And so it's not like they're asking you 50 different states requirements. They just ask you the code of professional conduct, which is most likely relevant to what is required in your particular state. And they're not going to get too heavily into that. Okay. And then statement on quality control standards, we will get into that more. Where does that come up? In a different chapter. I think it might be an appendix to one of the chapters. I'm not sure where exactly, but we will get into that later. And that basically is dealing with the way CPA firms should be structured to ensure that they have an adequate quality control system. Okay, question? Okay, again, when you practice with your task-based simulations, you will see that what am I trying to say here? You will see that those particularly come up in your task-based simulation and the research one. They'll always give you a research one to practice with. That's where you're going to have to start deciding, is it AUC, is it PCAOB, is it the attestation standards, etc. Okay. Now, the most authoritative standards when you're doing an audit, okay, most authoritative is what? Is the SASs for non-issuers, PCAOB for issuers. That's really what governs audits, okay? There are these other things, but the most authoritative is the auditing standard. Okay, all right, good. So let's come up to our first question, and for the folks that are new, okay. Welcome to the brand new change that was made for no reason to e-learning, which means I have to do this. Well, I don't know where these changes were made. Why?
I hate this change. It's so stupid.
Yeah, I don't know why they're making me do this. I have to sign in. So hang on, guys. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. Okay, really? I apologize. I can't always anticipate everything they're going to do to me. Okay, I got to do it this way. I don't understand why I have to do this because, oh, I know, because it's a new meeting. They deleted all of my meetings in Zoom. And so now Zoom thinks that I'm a new person or something. Okay, so let me see. I think I can lower that now. And now, let me come back and try it again. Okay, here we go. So okay, let's try it again. Oh boy. Okay. And let me share my screen again with you. Don't want that. this. Okay. All right. So you should, can you see the question in the poll up there now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. They deleted all my meetings, which means I got to start all over again with some things. Okay. All right. But we should be good now. So go ahead, guys. Take your best choice. I typically give about 2 minutes for you to be able to answer one of the questions. Okay. So this is similar to the CPA exam questions, similar to your homework. Only difference is you don't have A, B, C, D on the exam. You have a radio dial that you have to fill in, similar to what you're seeing on the screen for the poll. Okay. Although they do say A, B, C, D, but that little bubble is usually what you see without the letters. That's what you see on the exam. Okay, let's take a look at this one. And looks like most of us got it right. Okay, so that's great. Most of us got it right. We're, in this class, we shoot for getting, in the neighborhood of 70%, 75% correct the first time we go through these. Now, when you look at the how to study guide, what I tell you is when you do your homework, you should strive for 75. You're trying to get a 75 the first time you go through this stuff. That's why I want you to look at the flashcards and stuff before you go and you work a question. Okay, so we strive for 75. We're trying to get to 75 before we actually even work the questions. We go through them the first time, we get a 75. Put that set of homework questions away. You don't have to look at them again until you're getting ready for your exam. If you're under 75, then I need you to look at those questions you missed and rework the incorrect questions, rework those, and get that percentage up to 75, then put those questions away. Okay, so we try to get 75 together here in class. Sometimes we're above that. Sometimes, like this one, we're below that. Don't worry. If you get the questions right half the time here in class, then that means that you have what? That means you're 2/3 of the way there. You only need another 25% to get to the 75. You work these questions in your homework, you get a 75. You're going to rework all of the questions again, all of the multiple choice questions again, all of the simulations. You'll take another pass at those again prior to your exam. At that point, your scores are going to go from 75 to 80, 85, so that by the time you're working the questions on the exam, you're getting a 90% accuracy on the multiple choice questions. Well, if 50 of your points on the exam come from multiple choice questions, right, and you're getting a 90% accuracy on that, that means you got 45 points just from multiple choice questions. Since we need what? Since we need 75 to pass the exam, I can't erase that, that's not my mark. 75 points are needed to pass. That means you need 30 points from what? From your task-based simulation. Task-based simulation constitute 50 points. So 30 divided by 50 means that I have to be working those task-based simulation at more of an 80% accuracy, which takes some of the pressure off of those task-based simulations, which can be a little bit tricky sometimes. And so we really work to get those percentages up on the multiple choice questions. So even though we're at 60 for this question, okay, I'd like to see us getting closer to 75 together as we're going through these, but you can work on that in your homework as you build towards that 90% accuracy on exam day. Okay, Now, when we look at this, the content of this question, which of the following is most authoritative? Well, we saw that the most authoritative was what? The statement on auditing standards, if we're talking about the non-issuers, okay? They're not going to say, hey, what's the most authoritative between non-issuers and issuers, and then give you statements on auditing standards and PCAOB. You couldn't answer that question. If they're talking about non-issuers, then the correct answer would have to be what? PCAOB requirements. But if you look at all the rest of these, those were lower down on that graphic that I showed you just before we came to this question as to what's most authoritative versus least authoritative. So the things that are the incorrect answer were on that lower end of that arrow document. And let me just go ahead and get that question, get the poll out of the way for us, okay? And so you take a look, or you might have to close that yourself, I guess. You take a look and we have what? An AIC accounting guide. No, that's not most authoritative. That was lower down. They have guides that supplement the standards. A Journal of Accountancy article. In the absence of everything else, you might look to an AICPA Journal of Accountancy article. That was like at the very bottom down here, okay? So that kind of thing, a publication, that sort of stuff is at the bottom, okay? You come back up, looking at the choices here, specific guides provided by interpretation. Interpretations, they're kind of higher up there, okay, if you look at interpretations, but they are below what? Below the SASs, below the PCAOB, although this was asking us about a non-issuer. Question. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and let's move ourselves into module 3. And so I'm going to be, can whoever put that thing on there take that off, please? I think whoever put that little squiggly on there needs to take it off.
Oh, I'm sorry, Professor. I think it's me, Julia.
Yeah, can you erase that, please?
Yeah, let me try. I'm not sure how though.
Okay. Anybody know? It was done in Zoom. I don't know if I can get rid of it or not. I'm not sure how to. Anybody know how to erase an annotation? We're going to have to look at that the whole class here, I guess. I can't erase it. Let's see, maybe I can do it this way. Here we go. Got it. Okay. Okay, good. And we won't have that problem because I removed your ability to annotate the screen. Okay, good. All right, so we got that. Okay, let's go ahead then and let's start to take a look at module 2 now. Okay, and what happens is there are different parts of the engagement that we will be covering in the different chapters. Okay, so there are some questions though, and we're going to talk about this a few times as we go along, that you can answer just by knowing where you are in the engagement. Okay, so for example, if they're asking you that you're having a discussion with the predecessor auditor, when should that happen? Well, that's going to happen when you're doing what? When you're doing engagement acceptance activity. Do I even want to keep this client? If that's the case, that's something that's happening early on in the audit, okay? As I've mentioned, the reporting, which is what we're going to talk about here tonight in A1 primarily, happens at the end. It's one of the last sort of, it's the product of all these other steps, okay? But it's not a bad idea to sometimes look back to this chart here to see where you are in the audit, and sometimes that does help you answer some of the questions. Okay, so let's just go ahead and let's start to take a look at the whole idea of the audit function. Okay, and we are called independent auditors. We are independent because we are separate from management. Okay, so what we're doing is we are going to provide assurance. We will provide an opinion as to whether the financial statements are prepared in accordance with the applicable framework. Okay, so the auditor gives credibility to the financial statements. The responsibility for the financial statements comes from what? Are prepared by management and not the auditor. Okay, so since management is responsible for the financial statements, they prepare them, the auditor can come in independently and give an opinion on those financial statements. So they are responsible for preparing the financial statements, and then particularly relevant to the audit, they are responsible for establishing internal controls, implementing, maintaining internal controls that will help ensure that the financial statements are presented, are fairly prepared. So they have to prepare the statements, but they also have to allow consider, implement, and maintain internal controls that will allow the financial statements to be prepared free of material misstatement. And notice that's whether caused by error or fraud. Okay. Now, just coming over and taking a look at a separate discussion of auditors' responsibility. And guys, they give you pass keys, and sometimes you'll see me blow by pass key like it's not even there. You know, this sometimes these pass keys have as much to do with marketing as they do, you know, passing the CPA exam. You know, they want their book to look cool, so they're going to put a little key with the word pass key in a nice pastel color here. And at the end of the day, it's not really a pass key. It's something to have in your back of your mind. It's not something that, you know, is going to cause you to pass the exam, which to me is what a pass key should be. Sometimes I'll use the pass key if they do a good job of summarizing some key information that I think would be important for the exam, but often I just pass these by. And I've heard, you know, all kinds of amateurs talk about how to pass the CPA exam. I heard a guy one time say, all I did was I remembered all the pass keys and that helped me pass. Well, that's bull. Okay, so don't fall for things like that. There is no gimmick in terms of just know all the pass keys and you'll pass, or you can pass by always picking C. You know, I hear all kinds of silly things out there. Okay, the technique is the way to pass the exam is what I've laid out for you in that how to study guide and the way I'm showing you this material. Okay, and I'm not saying that I'm, you know, it's not like I'm saying I'm Jesus here. If you want to go to the next life, pass the exam, you have to come through me or anything like that. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying you're in my class and I'm going to coach you up to do the things that I think are important for you to, you know, be successful on the exam. Okay. All right. So I'll go past these pass keys a lot of times is what I'm saying. All right. Let's go to auditor's responsibility. Okay. And the auditor does need to maintain professional skepticism. Okay. Now, what is professional skepticism? Okay, and what professional skepticism says is this: look, you're going to be being provided evidence, okay, but just because somebody tells you something or somebody hands you a corroborating piece of evidence like a document or something doesn't mean that the auditor shouldn't maintain some sort of questioning mind about that evidence that you're obtaining. Now, that doesn't mean that you automatically think every document is a forgery, but you will often look at the circumstances around that document and say, well, is this document reasonable to support whatever the assertions are that management's including in the financial statements? So, for example, let's say you ask management for a document and then it takes them weeks to provide something that should be readily available from their accounting system. How would you feel about that document? That's a question.
You might feel as if maybe they had to go back and recreate it retroactively, which would cause Coin to question the integrity.
Exactly. Yeah. Why did it take so long? That's something that should be what? Readily available. You just press the button in the accounting system, it's there. Why did it take you so long to get that, right? Okay, very good. Okay, so that's really what we start to look at here is the auditor, you're getting evidence, and it's not like you automatically, say, hey, you fraudulent person, you liar, I know you're a liar, you're sitting there and you're saying, well, is there something that contradicts this piece of evidence? Okay, or is there something that calls into question the reliability of the document? Again, maybe it took them a long time. Okay, consideration of indications of fraud, and we're going to talk about the indicators of fraud in a different lecture. Okay, circumstances that suggest the need for audit procedures beyond those required by GAS. Maybe you've seen enough that you're going to go beyond what the generally accepted auditing standards say you should do, and you're going to ask for additional support for information that you receive. Okay, but notice, guys, very important, that this is all coming into what? Evaluation of evidence. Okay, so when we're dealing with professional skepticism, it doesn't mean that you say, oh, lying, I know they're lying to me. It's more, hey, they've given me some evidence, but is that evidence going to be persuasive enough for me to be able to say, hey, this is sufficient evidence to support the opinion? You maintain that professional skepticism. Okay, now this down here talks about impediments to acting with professional skepticism. Okay, and this is not a list of excuses. This is a list of cautions. So this isn't telling the auditor, well, you incurred this, so you weren't able to apply your professional skepticism, so you're okay. This is saying to you, hey, as a professional, okay, be aware that you have certain human biases and whatnot that could be affecting your professional skepticism. Okay, and you've got to always kind of ask yourself, am I in one of these sort of situations, okay, like an unconscious human bias, which may call the auditor to evaluate and recall information that favors the interests of the client over the interests of the investor. Oh, this is Joe. Joe would never do something like that. So I automatically believe Joe, okay? And these things can happen subconsciously. I was on an engagement one time where the GAO was responsible for looking to see that the Inspector General over customs was doing a good job. And so we had an interview with some of the customs auditors, their internal auditors. And I noted that the internal auditor kept saying, well, we do this and we do that. And I'm like, hang on a minute. If you're the Inspector General, you're really supposed to maintain an independence, although you're all under the same umbrella of customs. You're really supposed to maintain an independence. It's not we, it's them. And so that gave me some concern that maybe there was an unconscious human bias, that the person had lost some of their professional skepticism, some of their objectivity, because they kept referring to it as we instead of us versus the Inspector General versus the actual operational aspects of customs. Okay. Develop an inappropriate trust level or confidence in management. Okay, again, you've worked with them so long. Pressure to avoid potential negative interactions. Okay, you don't want to basically piss off the client because you know, the client is paying you, and you don't want to get them too upset sometimes. And so you might lose some objectivity there, or just work demands. Okay. So again, these things are not an excuse saying, well, if you incurred one of these, then it's okay that you didn't maintain your professional skepticism. This say, hey, be aware that these things happen. Okay. Okay, good. Now, when we do the audit, of course, we have to do the audit in accordance with ethical requirements as well. Okay, and again, the ethical requirements are included in the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct, as I said earlier. However, many state boards mirror their accountancy laws after the AICPA Board of Professional Conduct rules, not the board, but the AICPA's Code of Professional Conduct. And so you might get one or two questions that ask you some of the requirements there. And I think we talk about that in A6 a little bit. Okay. Okay, good. Now you come over and let's get a very important phrase down here. Okay. Now when I go past things, guys, that typically means, you know, we've already talked about it at some level, or it's just some additional information that I really have not seen tied to a lot of questions. So don't worry about that as I go past it. If you see something in the multiple choice questions, you're like, we really didn't talk about this. Where did that come from? You can go back and look back at your textbook to see where a particular question was discussed. And if I didn't cover it with you and you go back to the book, you're like, see, Lord didn't highlight that, and here's a question on it. That's okay. You can call me names if you want to. Okay. You can then, once you get done cussing me out, you can make a flashcard that helps you with that particular question, even though I may not have discussed it during our conversation together. I'm trying to get us a good 80–90% coverage of the things that we're going to see in our homework and stuff. The homework will help fill that gap because we only have a finite amount of time that we can spend together. And I don't want to, you know, sit here and try to cover every single minute thing that might possibly be on the exam. I'm going for an 80–90% efficiency to get the things that I think are most important for you on the exam. Okay. So that's why I go past some things, but we come over and we have reasonable assurance. Okay. And in order to express an opinion, the auditor is looking for reasonable assurance, not absolute. Okay. What happens? The auditor never gives absolute assurance. The auditor doesn't say if the financial statements have a material misstatement, you can kill me. Okay. There is always some chance that there will be a material misstatement and the auditor will not detect it. So our goal is to provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatement. That's another important thing. We're not looking for 2-cent errors unless we somehow determine that a 2-cent error could do what? Could change the opinion of an investor. And I'm here to tell you that if you have a potential client and you determine that a 2-cent error could make it is material, I suggest you don't take that audit. Okay. So we're going to talk about materiality in a different chapter, but we're really looking for things that are big enough or important enough to change the decision of a potential investor, potential creditor. Those items are material, and we're looking for a material misstatement. And even then, we're saying there's always a chance that there will be a material misstatement in the financial statements that we won't detect because we are not perfect. Okay, there are different things that could impede us from detecting that material misstatement. So we give reasonable assurance, not absolute. Okay, all right, good. Now, when we're determining the scope of the engagement, okay, we will have that scope determined by whether it is related to non-issuers or whether it is related to issuers. And the big difference between issuers and non-issuers is right here, in that we will need to integrate an audit of the financial statements with an audit of the internal control. We don't have to do that for issuers. Yes, we obtain an understanding of the internal control, but we don't have to express any kind of assurance on the internal control for a non-issuer. When you're auditing an issuer, a public company, yes, now you are required to give assurance around the internal control. So the important scope consideration between issuers and non-issuers. Okay. Okay, good. Now you come over, and as we've been saying, the objective of the audit of the financial statements is to provide a reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements are free of material misstatement, whether caused by error or fraud. We've heard that statement a couple times, okay? And then again, for public companies, okay, as mentioned previously, yes, we will integrate the audit of the financial statements with an assurance and reporting on the internal control. Now, in some cases, non-issuers and governmental entities may also have an audit of internal control over their reporting. Typically, that is at the entity's request. So a non-issuer could ask you to go beyond what's required by SAS for a non-issuer and then give some assurance on the internal control. That could happen, okay? They could request that. Government entities could request that. Now, just an aside, my personal opinion, I find it interesting that the federal government, okay, through Sarbanes-Oxley, it's a federal statute, through the Security Exchange Commission, through the PCAOB, requires public companies to have this reporting by the auditor on the internal control, literally give insurance over the internal control. Meanwhile, the federal government doesn't require it for their own entities in the generally accepted government auditing standards. In the GAO auditing standards, there's no requirement. An agency can request it, but there's no requirement that the internal controls be, that the auditor give an assurance on internal control. So I find that a little hypocritical that here we are talking about what? Talking about public funds. Meanwhile, we don't require any kind of an opinion over the internal controls that are there to protect those public funds. And I think the reason that this doesn't happen is that it would frighten you too much if it was reported out to you how poor many of the internal controls are in the federal government. And so, and all the adverse opinions that would be coming out on the internal controls of entities in the federal government. And I'm not just picking on federal government here. State and local governments don't even have any real provision for the entity allowing to ask for an opinion over their internal controls. So I think that these other entities, non-public companies and government entities, you know, could probably take a deep look at themselves and say, hey, maybe we ought to require this the way it's also required for publicly traded companies. Okay, but currently there is no real requirements over government entities and non-public entities that they have the reporting on the internal control. Okay. Okay, good. Come over and let's take a look at our next question. And I'll give you a couple of minutes for this one. Okay, guys, go ahead and take your best choice. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this thing up here in a couple seconds. So do your best, okay? And let's go ahead and let's take a look at this question, okay? And most of us got it right, 58%, okay? Of course, we're going for a little higher batting average than that here when we're together in class. But yeah, C is the correct answer. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and take the poll down here, but C is the correct answer. But let's just look at this one together. Okay, and they say, which of the following an example of the application of professional skepticism? Now, let me ask you, when we apply professional skepticism, what are we using that professional skepticism to do? That's a question.
Examine the evidence.
Good. Examine, think about the veracity would be a good word of the evidence. Good, good. So excellent. So as you start to look at these, you have to say, and they're looking for the one that is not an example. And it, by the way, that's something you got to get used to on the exam. Sometimes they'll ask you what is not an example of something. And if you miss that word not, then you're going to get stuck picking A, probably, unless A was the one that is not. Okay, but it probably won't be A because the examiners think about these kinds of mistakes. So A would probably not be the right answer in one where they say what is not, because they want to see if you make the mistake of reading the first answer, missing that not, and picking A to hurry up and move on. Meanwhile, if you read all the choices, and you should always read all of the choices, I don't care if God's standing there telling you A is the right answer, always read through all of the choices to make sure you're satisfied that you don't have two right answers in a question. Because if you do, that's going to indicate maybe you missed the word not there. And that's why it looks like there's two right answers. Okay, so which is not the application of professional skepticism? Well, it must be the one that doesn't involve evaluating the veracity of evidence. So let's take a look. Designing additional procedures to obtain more reliable evidence. Well, that's definitely professional skepticism because I'm looking to see if I can get more reliable evidence. Obtaining corroborating management explanations through consultation with a specialist. So management has told you something. Oral evidence is evidence, but then if you're trying to corroborate that, okay, with what? With the work of a specialist, corroborating means that you're looking for something that supports more that evidence that you're looking at, which would be management's discussion. Using third-party confirmations to provide support for management representations. Again, management is representing things to you. That's evidence, but you're doing what? You're corroborating that, you're checking the veracity of that with third-party confirmation, somebody outside of management. We know that C is the right answer. Acquire prior engagement personnel regarding their assessment of management's honesty and integrity. Well, you know, yes, you may do that, but that's more of an acceptance of a client issue. You don't want to be involved with a client that lacks integrity, okay? And so you might talk about with third parties, whatever, issues regarding management's integrity, so you know, well, who am I dealing with here? But that is not an issue of checking the veracity of evidence. Okay. I think you're starting to get a sense, guys, as to how you have to kind of build up the thought process on this auditing. The auditing exam in and of itself is not that hard. I believe it's the easiest of the 4 exams. I believe that because I've been an auditor I was an auditor for years and years, so I've got some practical experience that I can rely on. But and I've been teaching it for a long time. But by the same token, I think a lot of this is starting to understand the language, the way they sort of cloak the correct answer to make it sound wrong, how they make the wrong answers sound right. Okay, so it doesn't surprise me in the early going that maybe we've got some different choices coming up as you build up that practice, that muscle tissue with these questions. I think you're going to start to see that you're going to have a pretty nice batting average with these audit questions and be in pretty good shape for the auditing exam. Okay. All right, good. So with that little pep talk, what I'm going to do is take a break. Okay. We'll come back at, let's just make it, because I hate weird odd times. Let's just make it 6:35. Okay. So we'll go ahead and take, a little longer than the full, then it'll be about 13 minutes unless I keep talking here, right? Okay, so we'll come back at 6:35. I want to take the break now because this next section is really one big chunk of discussion, the audit opinion, and I want to roll through that without any breaks, okay? All right, guys, so we'll come back about 6:35, all right? I'm going to pause the recording. Somebody, please remind me to start the recording again when we come back. Okay, so we've resumed recording. Any questions about anything before we continue on into module 3?
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask, in the context of this course, public versus non-public, if you can define those terms.
Okay, yeah, sure. We're talking about certified public accountants, CPA, which means that you have a license from state authorities to provide certain regulated services, such as conducting audits. Okay, so just like under the Department of Consumer Affairs in the state of California, if you want to cut hair, you have to be licensed by the Department of Consumer Affairs. I forget what they call that, beautician's board, whatever, to cut hair. In the state of California, under the Department of Consumer Affairs, you have a license from the State Board of Accountancy to provide accounting services to the public. And so you can give an opinion on financial statements. When we talk about non-public versus public companies, now we're not talking about the auditors, we're talking about the companies. Now they call them issuers for public companies because you are issuing stock and bonds to the public. So they call those public companies or issuers. Non-public companies or non-issuers do not issue stock, do not issue bonds on various exchanges to the general public. Now that doesn't mean that they won't issue stock at all to a limited number of investors, or it doesn't mean that they won't get a loan from a bank, but they are not publicly traded on the stock exchanges and whatnot.
Awesome, that helps out a lot.
Yeah, so that's what we're talking about. And public companies are regulated at the federal level through the SEC, Security Exchange Commission. And the reason we are able, when I say we, I mean the federal government, are able to regulate entities that issue stock across state lines, and through interstate commerce, the federal government sees the authority to regulate public companies. And so the SEC, Security Exchange Commission, has recognized the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board as the entity that is recognized to issue standards for public companies. It's also written into the Sarbanes-Oxley Act under federal statute, which actually what the Sarbanes-Oxley Act did was create the PCAOB, and then the SEC recognized the PCAOB standards as the standards that should be used to audit public companies. They had to do some cleanup on federal statute at that time, because before that, it was just the AICPA that issued standards for non-public companies and public companies. And there was some disagreement as to whether the SEC actually had the authority to set the accounting standards. So the SEC, the Sarbanes-Oxley cleaned that up. It said PCAOB is created, and the SEC will recognize PCAOB as the entity that will write the auditing standards when you're auditing public companies. So that left the AICPA with what? With the non-public companies, and it also left them with the realization that, hey, maybe their auditing standards hadn't quite been what they should be, because PCAOB came out of, Sarbanes-Oxley came out of the whole Enron and WorldCom crisis and whatnot. And so they really do their best to mirror their standards as close to the PCAOB requirements as possible. But there's still some areas where the AICPA says we're going to do things a little bit differently. And we will see that as we go through module 3 now, talking about the audit of the audit opinion, okay? Because we're going to see that there are some different requirements and certainly some noticeably different formats for these opinion reports, okay? So when we talk about them, we are in many cases going to give you examples and show how they look, whether it's public or non-public, okay? And so the best thing for us to do, I always call this thing the grapefruit, is for us to take a look at this chart here and start to understand what these different titles for the types of opinions mean. And I'm just going to use a silly little example of, let's say you have a friend and your friend calls you up and says, I want you to come over and I want you to look at my outfit. I have a big job interview tomorrow, and I want you to look at the outfit that I'm going to wear for that interview. So you say, okay, sure, I'll be right there. So you come over and your friend comes out dressed impeccably. Suit, shirt, shoes, socks, they got it nailed, okay? So what you would do is you would give your friend an unqualified opinion, and you would be happy. You'd be saying, man, your suit looks good. You're probably going to get the job just on how well you are dressed, okay? That's an unqualified opinion because you're saying, hey, I love it, okay? Now, if you notice, they also have the word unmodified here, okay? So if we're talking about a non-public company, okay, the opinion on the financial statements, and now let's get away from your buddy's outfit. Now you're sitting there and we're talking about the financial statements. So the auditor has done their procedures and they're saying we're providing reasonable assurance that there are no material misstatements in these financial statements. Well, the auditor is what? The auditor is happy. And if it's a non-public company and the auditor is happy, we call that an unmodified opinion. If it is a public company, we're calling that an unqualified opinion, okay? So 2 different words depending on whether you're public or non-public. Notice the rest of the words on this thing, there's only one, so they share similar wording for the type of opinion between public and non-public. But this is the kinds of differences that we are going to have to make sure we're comfortable with and call out from time to time as difference between public and non-public, okay? But the key takeaway here is what? Auditor is happy. The auditor is smiling when they give an unmodified, unqualified opinion, meaning they think that the financial statements are free of material misstatement, okay? Now, you come over and let's just make sure we're comfortable with something here. Here's the financial statements. Who prepares the financial statements? That's a question.
Management.
Management, good, okay. And we have this investor over here. Who wants to take their hard-earned money and they want to give it to the company. right? So that the company can use it and the value of the stock or whatever will grow, right? Okay, good. So the person wants some information, so they're going to look. Okay, that's why I'm pointing to their eyes. They're going to look at those financial statements, right? But how do they know? Maybe management's putting things down that, are not correct. And so what happens? The auditor will give an opinion on those financial statements. So this is my auditor. I'm going to put an A on. And the auditor is giving that opinion. And if the auditor is happy, then that's called an unmodified opinion. Now the investor looks and they say, okay, I can rely on these financial statements. There are no material misstatements. Okay. Now what happens? If they start to have material misstatements, now what do we mean by a misstatement? Well, misstatement means that there's a generally accepted accounting principle problem. So the generally accepted accounting principles say that you're supposed to put a green elephant on every page of the financial statements. Management does not put a green elephant on every page of the financial statements. So what happens? The auditor now goes away from the happy and now starts to go into the sad. So what happens? Well, let's say go back to your buddy, and your buddy comes out in the suit, and when you get down to the shoes, they're wearing a pair of Air Jordans. Do they still have Air Jordans? Okay. They're wearing a pair of Air Jordans. Jordan still make the Airs? Okay. They have a pair of Air Jordans, right? And you're saying, well, what shoes are you going to wear to the interview tomorrow? And your friend says, oh, I'm going to wear these because Air Jordans, everyone knows those are cool and they'll think I'm cool if I wear these. No. Don't wear Air Jordans with that suit to the interview. If you wear that suit to the interview, they're not going to, that Air Jordans to the interview with that suit, they're not going to hire you. So what have you done? You have qualified your opinion. You've said, I like your outfit, except, and that's the qualification, except for the shoes. Okay. Now, is this a material problem with your buddy's outfit? These Air Jordans?
Yes.
That's a material problem, right? And you've called it out. Okay. Well, that's the same thing auditors do when they look at the financial statements, right? Hey, GAAP says you're supposed to put a green elephant on every page of the financial statements. You did not do that. That's a material problem. And so the auditor will say, in my opinion, the financial statements are free of material misstatement, except for the fact that they didn't put the green elephant, except for the fact that they didn't account correctly for some accounts receivable, except for that they didn't disclose something that GAAP says that you're supposed to disclose. So the auditor is not happy with this situation, but they have warned the users that there is this material misstatement, and they're able to determine that that one material misstatement or two material misstatement is significant enough to call out in their report. Okay. Now, the chart works this way. Okay. As things get worse, okay, things go from bad to worse, we will go from qualified to adverse. So now I'm going to go ahead, and these are supposed to be tiers that are falling from the eyes of the auditor. So the auditor is even sadder than they were before. And now what's happened is there is either a very pervasive misstatement, meaning it is very big, has a very big impact on the financial statements, or there are several, maybe even though only one would just maybe result in qualification, but now I have several misstatements that have built up to push me to an adverse opinion. And with an adverse opinion, the auditor says, these financial statements are not in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. Now they're not saying except for, they're saying forget about it. The financial statements are not in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. So now let's say your buddy comes out and instead of wearing a proper business outfit, they're wearing a whole, sweat outfit. And you say, okay, I'm ready to see your suit. They say, no, this is it. I'm going to wear this tomorrow. Look at this is sweat outfit is this running suit is the bomb. Are you kidding? You're going to say, fine, if we're going, to hang out at Chili's. But, if you're wearing that to a job interview, they're not even going to let you up the elevator for that. Security's going to hold you up at the front desk and not let you in. Are you crazy? You give an adverse opinion on your buddy's outfit in that situation. Okay. So the chart works one side or the other. If you think everything's cool, public company, unqualified, non-public company, unmodified, you start to have problems. And as your problems go from bad to worse, you go from qualified to adverse. Question. Okay, good. Now, when you deal with the other side of the chart, okay, and they used to call it this, and then I think they got scared because maybe people were getting offended that we were calling this gas issues. But I think it's a good way to remember it. Gas issues mean that there has been a problem that we haven't followed the generally accepted auditing standards. There was something that stopped us from following those standards. So when you get on that side of the chart, okay, the auditor goes from happy to sad because there's been some gas issue. For example, go back to your buddy's outfit. So your buddy calls you and says, hey, come and see my outfit. And they come out, everything's great, you're happy, you get issued unmodified, unqualified. But let's say you come and your buddy comes out and they're just wearing their socks, very nice socks. Those are good socks, they match with your outfit. You got to be careful with socks. One time I was on travel and I didn't have enough socks, or I didn't pack enough socks or something, or I forgot to pack dress socks. So I wore, kind of those short sweat socks, that you wear when you're going to go for a run or something, because I had those and they're white. I'm wearing a black suit. I've got these white sweat socks on, but I'm like, shouldn't be a problem because once we sit down, my legs will be under the conference table and nobody will see it. And then, of course, what happens is they said, oh, let's go sit over on those couches. So now I'm sitting on the couch, and of course my, pant leg goes up when I sit down, and there's my white socks. I'm sitting there like a fool, with my white. So of course, it wasn't a job interview. I was auditing them, so I really didn't care that much what they thought about my sock. But you got to think through these kind of things. So anyway, you see and you say, hey, your socks look great, but what are going to be your shoes? And they say, oh, yeah, I haven't picked up the shoes yet. I'm going to get them in the morning before I go to the interview. It's in the afternoon. I'll have enough time to pick up a pair of shoes, whatever, right? And so you say, okay, well, if that's the case, your outfit looks good, except for what I would have been able to tell you about your outfit had I been able to observe your shoes on the date that you asked me to give an opinion on your outfit. So if there's some procedure that the auditor could perform, the auditing standards say you're supposed to confirm accounts receivable, but I wasn't able to confirm the entity's account receivable to get comfortable with what they reported as account receivable on the financial statement, on the balance sheet, then the auditor will qualify their opinion. Will say, hey, the financial statements are free material misstatement, except for what I would have been able to say had I been able to confirm account receivable. What I would have been able to say about my buddy's outfit had I been able to see the shoes. Okay. Now, if the procedures that you can't perform become so big or so pervasive that they go from bad to worse, now the auditor, and I'm not going to put a face on this, a mouth anyway, on this auditor. They have eyes, but no face, no mouth. And the reason I'm doing that, and I'm just sort of going like this, because the auditor is sitting there saying, I don't know. There were so many procedures that I could not perform here that I am going to disclaim an opinion. Okay, let's talk about your buddy again in their outfit one more time, right? So what happens? Your buddy calls you on the phone and says, hey, I want you to tell me what my outfit, what you think of my outfit for my job interview tomorrow. You say, okay, I'll be right there. No. Don't come over. From the sound of my voice, how does my outfit look? Well, you would disclaim an opinion. You'd say, I don't know. I can't tell you anything from the sound of your voice. Are you crazy? I have to at least see the outfit. Well, if there's so many procedures that the auditor can't perform that they become pervasive, the auditor just shrugs their shoulders or throws up their hands and say, I don't know. I disclaim an opinion. Now, in the case of the federal government, okay, my agency, the GAO, was the auditor of record for the consolidated financial statements of the federal government. They still are. They were when I was working there. I worked on that engagement. And what would happen is the GAO would disclaim an opinion on the consolidated financial statements for the federal government. Now, there were several reasons. One was that nobody can get an opinion on the Department of Defense. And a lot of times my students say, oh, that's because of national security issues. No, because the Department of Defense's asset management system is a mess and they can't get it together. And what happens is if you have a disclaimer on a subsidiary, Department of Defense is like a subsidiary of the federal government. If you have a disclaimer on a major subsidiary, often that disclaimer bubbles up into a disclaimer on the consolidated statements. So if you can't get a good opinion on a component of an entity, that could lead to a disclaimer on the consolidated statements. The other reason the GAO issues a disclaimer on the consolidated financial statements of the federal government is they can't get the balance sheet to balance. What the federal government does is it has a system that creates the consolidated statements, and then it tries to back them into the 32 agencies that constitute the consolidation. And guess what? It doesn't work. And of course it doesn't work. That's not how you perform a consolidation. Consolidation takes all the individual statements and consolidates them into one consolidated. When you have one system preparing one set of statements, and then you back it into 32 systems that generate 32 statements, guess what? It doesn't balance. There are transactions that don't get it properly eliminated between the two. The balance sheet doesn't balance. That's a big, pervasive deal. And so GAO disclaims an opinion on the consolidated financial statements of the federal government. I could go on and on about some of the other issues. Those are the two big ones. Okay. And so when you have things like that happening, eventually an auditor just has to say, I don't know. Just like you'd have to say, I don't know, if you couldn't see your buddy's outfit. Okay. Question. This is just an overview. Okay, good. So let's come over and let's take a look at the unmodified for a non-public company, unqualified for a public, okay? And it says that the financial statements are free of material misstatement in conformity with the applicable framework. Applicable framework meaning, you know, they had to get more generic in their discussion of applicable framework during the time that IFRS was still tested on the exam. That's going away July 1st. And so, you know, that's why I'm comfortable saying gap problem over here. Applicable framework is a little more inclusive of other sets of standards. But again, this is the situation when the auditor is happy, okay? And note that the term unmodified is used for non-issuers, qualified, unqualified used for issuers, okay? Now you come over and just to show you in print here, okay, what we saw in the charts, qualified means that we have modified the opinion for something, gap issue. Adverse is gap issue. Okay, so these are both gap issues. And then disclaimer and adverse can also be relevant for a gas issue. Okay, so you'll see questions coming up here pretty soon. And I'm going to go back to the chart in which we'll sit here. Oops. And okay. Too aggressive with the mouse there. Okay. In which we'll look and they'll ask you a question. Auditor is trying to decide between a qualified or an adverse opinion. Is that a gap issue or a gas issue?
Yeah.
That's a gap issue, right? Okay, even though what both gap and gas use qualify when the auditor starts to see problems, when your problems go more pervasive, excuse me, then we change the language for gap to adverse. We change the issue for gas to disclaimer. Okay, good. Auditor was not able to confirm accounts receivable. The auditor should decide, depending on the pervasiveness of the issue, between a qualified and a
Adverse.
no. Auditor was not able to confirm account receivable. Confirming account receivable is a way of evaluating the audit evidence, right? Getting a third-party confirmation.
Yeah, so it should be disclaimer. Gotcha.
So good, it's been a gas issue, so it's qualified or disclaimer, right? Okay, question? Okay, good. So we got to start to develop our comfort level with those terms, okay? And we're going to go ahead now and look at an example of, sorry guys, my mouse is outsmarting me today. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at this question. Okay, guys, go ahead and take your best selection on this. Okay, this is a example of a question. I can guarantee you're going to get something like this on the exam. Okay, so you want to practice with this. Okay, so take your best choice. All right, and let's go ahead and let's take a look at this. And I'm giving you about 2 minutes. And good percentage. 88% of us got it correct. Okay, of the folks that tried it, I've got about 3 people not participating, and that's not good. Guys, this class is all about exercise. You don't exercise, you don't get the results. Okay, I mean, it's that basic about this class. This is about exercising to get yourself to the strength where you can pass this freaking exam. There's absolutely no reason this class does you no good if you don't use what you learn in this class to go and pass the CPA exam. If you're sitting over here just trying to ride the coattails to an A, you're making a huge mistake. Okay, so you need to come to class, you need to listen to what I'm saying, you need to participate, see what you're getting the answers right or not. So when I see, 3 or 4 people not trying, I get a little, and if you've been in the class before, you're probably tired of hearing this speech, but I get a little bit annoyed with that because it's not doing you any good. It's like, watching your, younger brother or your kid or something do something that is not beneficial to them. And that's why I react the way I do. So if you're in this class, give these things a shot. If you're going to sit here for 3 hours and let my voice invade the walls of your house, okay, then you might as well sit here and do the work. Okay. All right. So enough of that. But you come over and the answer is B, which most of us that tried it got it right. Okay. But let's take a look at this. And I want to go ahead and get rid of this poll. Okay. And let's just take a look at this. And an auditor of a non-issuer, okay, and by the way, wouldn't matter if it was an issuer, it would be the same answer, concludes that a client's illegal act, which has a material effect on the financial statements, has not been properly accounted for or disclosed. So if we're saying that something has not been properly accounted for or disclosed, okay, we got to figure out what side of the chart we're on. If something isn't accounted for correctly, is that a generally accepted accounting principle problem, or is that a generally accepted auditing standard problem? Answer, generally accepted accounting principle problem, GAAP problem. So our choices are what? Qualified or adverse. We're on that side of the grapefruit, right? Okay. There are no questions on the exam where the right answer is this. An auditor never, ever is trying to decide between an adverse or a disclaimer. Those are on opposite sides of the grapefruit. And so you're either giving an adverse or a disclaimer. You're not trying to decide between those two, okay? Disclaimer is not right because it's a GAAP issue. And I had said that it wouldn't matter if it was an issuer or a non-issuer in context of the correct answer. You could eliminate D because it's not going to be unmodified. And if it was a public company, it wouldn't be unqualified because they're saying something has not been properly accounted for or disclosed. Question? Okay, good. So that kind of gives us the sense of what generates these different types of opinions. So what we're going to focus in now is the wording of these different types of opinions, starting with the unmodified, which the format that we're going to be looking at is only relevant to non-issuers. So this is an area where they not only give different names to the types of opinion here, unmodified for non-issuers, unqualified for issuers, but also the structure of the report is different between the two. So we're going to have to be careful here as we start to see some differences between what the Auditing Standards Board, ASB, right? ASB is part of the AICPA, what they're saying the report should look like. Auditing Standards Board is made up of I forget the number now. It's something like 15 members. And they have some folks from the international firms for the Big Four, some from the national firms, some from local, some from regional firms, some from smaller local firms who all come together to help write the auditing standards. A lot of times the questions that you see on the CPA exam focus on the exceptions. So unlike with the accounting standards, it's sort of either right or wrong. You either do it this way or you do it that way, or they might give you two different ways to choose from, but it's very narrow into what we're supposed to do. With the auditing standards, there's almost always an exception as to how you should handle a particular issue. And that's because they have practicing auditors who come in and write the standards. It's not like the FASB, it's a 7-member board that sits there and all they do is theorize on accounting. This is what? This is practicing auditors. So it's not only what should be done, but it's also what can be done. And because we have this issue of what can be done, that can be done generates some exceptions to the general rules. So we'll see the general rules and then we'll see some exceptions. But for the most part, now the opinions follow a very specific format, but the format changes depending on whether it's issuers or non-issuers. So what I want to do, rather than look at this table, is go straight over to the actual example of the non-issuer's unmodified opinion. I don't know why my mouse is giving me a hard time tonight. Okay, and if it's a non-issuer, it's called unmodified. Okay, and what I want you to do is flashcard this report. Okay, word for word. And so we're going to create 1, 2, 3. We're going to prepare 4 or 5 flashcards, depending on how you want to look at it. Okay, so 5, let's just say 5 flashcards. Okay, flashcard per paragraph. And let's make it 4 flashcards. Sorry, guys. Really? Is it going to really mess with me? Not let me do my flashcard. Okay. Bastard. Okay, good. So that's flashcard number 1 right there. Okay. And even though it's not officially called the intro flashcard, you can kind of in the back of your mind think of this as the introductory flashcard. And I want you to be able to memorize this word for word. Okay, so let's just look at it. This is the unmodified opinion for non-issuers. And we say here, we have audited the company financial statements of ABC Company. And then we start to call out the financial statements. Okay, that's the intro paragraph. Now, notice how important we think it is that we understand what management's responsibility is, which is going to be our second flashcard, versus what we think the auditor's responsibility is. So management is responsible for the financial statements and the internal control. We do this because we want everyone to understand that we have a different responsibility than management. Management is responsible for the financial statements. The auditor is responsible for the audit and providing the opinion on the financial statements. Flashcard, that is flashcard number 3. And that's why I debated on the number of paragraphs or number of flashcards here, because you can see that's kind of the big part of this report. Okay. And notice we talk about all the different things that the auditor does, express an opinion, okay, on the financial statements, delineating the difference between management's responsibility and auditor responsibility. Management's responsible for financial statements. We're responsible for an opinion. We start to talk about the scope of the work we do. This is not officially the scope paragraph. That's this flashcard 3. This is not officially the scope paragraph called that anymore, but it's really laying out what we do. Now, this little baby paragraph down here, okay, I used to call it an orphan paragraph because it's all by itself down here. Okay, we believe that our work provides a basis for our opinion. So we are saying we did all that work and it allows us to give our opinion. And so here's the fourth flashcard. Okay, flashcard 4. Okay, and here we give our opinion. In our opinion, the finance referred to above present fairly in all material respects, the balance sheet, etc. And notice we said that we followed standards that are promulgated in the United States of America, meaning what? US GAAP. And when we follow the AICPA auditing standards, AICPA, ASB standards. In other words, we're following what? We're following the AUC standards, all that. We call that out as the standards in the United States of America. They have some mnemonic here, guys, that I'm, filling the bubbles. If you want to see the bubbles, you have to go watch the lecture. I don't care about their bubbles, okay? I care about you memorizing each one of these paragraphs, and here's why. You're going to get a bunch of multiple choice questions about the opinion, and if you've got the thing memorized, it's very easy to answer whatever they're asking you about that. More importantly, they will give you a task-based simulation. And the task-based simulation that I've seen that they tend to like here with the opinion is they say, your staff wrote an opinion. You're the senior, you're the audit manager. The senior gave the staff some comments. Tell us whether or not you agree with the comments that were given to the staff member that wrote this. Well, if you've got this thing memorized, that task-based simulation is a piece of cake for you, because how can they fool you with anything? You know every single thing that's supposed to be in that, right? So you will knock that task-based simulation out of the ballpark by memorizing the way this thing is written like this. Okay? Question?
Okay. So we memorize all of those word for word, basically.
Yeah, and I would break them down to 4 flashcards, since it's kind of hard to memorize this whole thing. But yeah, you should be, look, you might have to look back a couple times, okay? I'm not going to kill you. It's not like I'm going to come to your house and say, you wake up, give me the, the Matthew, yes, stand up and tell me the opinion, but you should be pretty comfortable with this, obviously, right? If I'm telling you memorize it, yeah. Okay, and you're gonna see, and when I was taking the exam, I was like, okay, I'll memorize this stupid thing. They want me to memorize this stupid thing. They're telling me what to do. I just paid Becker. I think in those days, Becker cost like $1,200, which was a lot of money. That's why the price for the materials fee that they charge is pretty nice little price. Back in 1987, before you were born, this thing cost me $1,200. So I said to myself, if I paid $1,200, and all my friends and my family were like, "Are you crazy? You gave them $1,200. What the hell's wrong with you? They took you." So I'm like, okay, I can't be the fool that doesn't pass the exam after doing this, right? And so I went ahead and studied my ass off and did everything they told me to. And it paid huge dividends, okay, that I had memorized this thing, okay, for the reasons that I'm telling you, okay? So go ahead and memorize that, okay? And that's the unmodified opinion for non-public companies, okay? Now, if you sit here and you follow more than one set of standards, okay, then you can go ahead and write the report saying that you did the audit in accordance with those standards and describe that situation. Okay, so it's okay that you could use the other standards to do the audit, and if you do, you can basically say that you follow their standards. Okay, now sometimes you'll have a situation where you have a company that maybe is thinking about going public, but they're not public yet. So you're supposed to follow GAS, but you may want to do some of the things that PCAOB requires. So if that's the case, okay, you still have to follow the GAS standards. However, you can use the report format that we're going to talk about for PCAOB and then simply amend the PCAOB report to say that you also conducted the audit in accordance with GAS. And again, this is significant or relevant, I guess is the better word, if you have a client that maybe is in some final stages of funding. They're doing, you know, Series C, Series D level of funding. They're getting ready to go public, and they want to see to make sure that they're going to be able to follow the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board rules. So you go ahead, and even though they're not public yet, you follow the PCAOB rules for the report, but you're supposed to follow the GAS rules. So they say, do the GAS audit, but you can issue the PCAOB report and just amend it to say that, hey, we follow the GAS standards here. Okay. All right. A couple of annoying points. I don't see that the examiners get too tied up in that, but I didn't want to just go right past that. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about the and again, the word changes when we go from non-public to public companies here, from unmodified to unqualified opinion. Now, again, unqualified opinion, I know, you know, in most things in life, they tell you you're unqualified, you're sad, right? For the auditor, unqualified, meaning I'm not going to call out something that I don't like about the financial statement. So it's going to be unqualified. Okay, and that's a good thing. And let's just, you know, what does that mean? Are you seeing that black spot there? Yes.
Yeah, on your screen.
Well, let's see. I don't really need what's on this page. So let's see if it goes away when I go to the next page. Okay, good. So we don't have to do anything because I don't want anything from that page anyway. Okay, so let's just go over it, and just like we did for the non-public company, for the public company unqualified report, let's just see what flashcards we're going to have here. Now, notice, guys, of course, to the shareholders, right? But notice, very important difference in that the opinion paragraph does what? It comes first. Okay, so notice the opinion is very much the same. We have audited the company's statements, and we come up and we say, in our opinion, financial statements present fairly. So the outcome is the same. The auditor is happy, but the PCAOB, right, decided that this should be, the opinion should come first. That's the first thing you see. Okay. Then we start calling out the basis for our opinion. And the basis for our opinion is kind of like the auditor's responsibility paragraph for the non-public. It's analogous to that. We put like auditor responsibility for non-public. Okay, and flashcard that. Okay, and then I find this annoying. I think the PCAOB should have just left early for dinner that night rather than sit here and decide to do this. Okay, and sometimes you get boards together, and I don't know, somebody on the board talks the rest of the board and the board is tired into doing something stupid. And I feel that this is one of those things. You know, probably PCOB heard me say that. They'd say, shut up. Okay, but I just think that this is dumb. Okay, what they say is that you have to put a critical matters paragraph at the end of the public company report. And that even if you don't feel you have a critical matter, you still have to have a critical matters paragraph that says that you don't have a critical matter. So it's almost like they're forcing the auditors to invent, well, we got to have a critical matters, either saying there is none or saying that, you know, we have one. And it's kind of like, you know, like having to wear a shirt that says, you know, I don't have a disease or something. I don't know. It's just stupid, you know, unless you have the critical matter, you shouldn't have to talk about a critical matter in my mind. But the Auditing Standards Board said, no, you're going to have a critical matters paragraph. And then you get someone all excited. Ooh, what's your critical matter? Well, the critical matter is that I don't have a critical matter. So to me, that gets a little silly, but you do have to have that paragraph. Now, I was looking at Apple's financial audit opinion on their financial statements the other day for one of my other classes. I use it as an example. And they had a critical matters paragraph in there about an uncertain tax position they were taking. And again, I'm like, okay, I guess that affects their deferred tax liability or whatever. Maybe that's why they're saying that's a critical matter that could affect the financial statements, but it just gets a little annoying because it's like we've pressured the auditors now to come up with a critical matter almost. And I don't care for that. Okay, but anyway, notice that the communication of the critical matter, okay, does not alter the opinion. So just because you're calling a critical matter, it's not altering that you believe that the financial statements are free of material misstatement. It does not change that. Okay, question? Okay, good. Make those flashcards. And then they give me some guidance about my favorite subjects here, critical matters paragraph, which I just find this annoying. The auditor must include any critical matters, okay, or state that there were no critical audit matters, okay. It is expected that in most audits, the auditor will identify a critical matter. Well, thanks a lot. Now we're forcing the auditor to go find something to put in that critical matters paragraph. I don't like that. Anyway, and then come over and, you know, we start getting up into, you know, we're going to even give you some bubbles for mnemonic on these critical matters. And I've had enough of the critical matters. Know that you're supposed to have that paragraph. Know that they expect you to find those in most audits, and then know how to document that you had the discussion, what the situation is with the critical matter, and the auditor should document whether the matter was determined to be a critical matter or not. And it's like, well, yeah, it was, because the standards, I feel like the standards are becoming part of the story here at this point. So that just bugs me a little bit. Okay, question? Okay, now that's for public companies. Now let's go ahead and let's look at this question. And speaking of annoying things, this question we're going to do together because I hate this question and it's annoying and I wish Becker would take it out of here. Okay, but they don't listen to me about that. This question persists. It's been there for years. I can't get it out of here. So this question says, when financial statements contain a departure from US GAAP, because due to unusual circumstances, the statements would otherwise be misleading, the auditor should express an opinion that is unmodified. So the takeaway is that it's okay to depart from GAAP, have a departure from GAAP, and still give an unmodified, unqualified opinion, okay, if following gap would cause the statements to be misleading, okay? All right, fine. I guess you can memorize that, whatever. And I guess this was a question that was on the CPA exam a long time ago. And somebody in Becker got impressed with this. So I called the director of the material. I finally got a hold of her and I said, well, give me an example of when this happens. And nobody can give me an example. Nobody can give me an example ever where they've ever seen something like this. So I'm left speechless, exampleless, to give you an example as to when this happens, but here it is. Here's a question that if causing the financial statements to be misleading, a following gap would cause the financial statements to be misleading, it is okay for the entity to not follow gap and the auditor give an unmodified opinion. Okay, enough of that. Let's come over and let's start to look at the next module, which now we're going to start to see what happens when we have to modify our opinions. Boy, my mouse is out of control. Who's running that mouse? Okay. All right. So first we're going to talk about what? The qualified or adverse. That means we're over here. That means we have what? We have gap problems, right? And we're going to be deciding between qualified or adverse. Now, our primary focus as we go through this is not so much the situations that can cause the qualified or adverse, okay, because there's an unlimited universe of things that could cause an auditor in their judgment to decide to qualify or adverse for gap problems. So I don't need a listing here of the things that cause me to qualify or adverse. I just need to know that it is a gap problem. And then I need to know, well, how will that change the form and content of the report, of the unmodified, unqualified report, if I have one of these situations? And since we're talking about non-issuers, it would be, how do I modify the, they call it the standard report, the unmodified report, if I have a gap problem, okay? So when we're looking at the qualified opinion, okay, and I just want you to come over and I want you to look at that qualified opinion when we have a gap problem, okay? And notice now, this is the qualified opinion for a gap problem. And again, they're calling it inadequate disclosure. Inadequate disclosure, guys, is simply a type of gap problem. And I really don't care that you have a list in your head of what gap problems are, because there is no such list. It's an unlimited universe of things that could be a gap problem. They're going to make it clear to you that it's an accounting disclosure issue that makes it a gap problem, okay? And when you have a qualified opinion for a gap problem, let's take a look and notice that what? Notice and I want you to flashcard. You don't have to memorize the whole opinion. I want you to flashcard the structure here, okay? So flashcard that the management responsibility paragraph, well, intro paragraph is the same. Management responsibility paragraph is the same. Auditor's responsibility paragraph is the same as the modified, the standard report. It's all the same, okay? Now, here's where it starts to change. Remember that I called it a baby paragraph. I used to call it an orphan paragraph, but I felt sorry for it. So now I just call it a baby paragraph. It's all by itself down there. For the unmodified, they said, here's the basis for our opinion, okay? For the modified, for the qualification, now they say, here's the basis for my qualified opinion. So your flashcard would say what? Hey, The intro paragraph is the same. Management responsibility paragraph, the same. Auditor's responsibility paragraph, remember that was that one big paragraph, is the same, except that last sentence no longer says, here's the basis for our opinion. It says, here's the basis for our qualified opinion. The next thing you put on the flashcard is then we will give the basis for our qualified opinion, whatever it is. I don't care. Inadequate disclosure. GAAP says that there's supposed to be a green elephant on every page of the financial statements. If we were writing the opinion about our buddy's shoes, we would say, we don't like the fact we're qualifying our opinion because we don't like the fact that my buddy thinks it's okay to wear, our buddy thinks it's okay to wear Air Jordans to an interview, whatever the issue is. And that's why I don't want to get into a list of the nature of issues that could cause you to qualify your opinion for GAAP reasons. I want you to know how you change the report we've memorized. So notice the strategy. We memorize the unmodified report. We don't have to memorize every single report in here. We just need to know how to tweak it when something changes. Now we've had a GAAP problem and we're having to qualify. And then the last thing you put on your structure flashcard is you have to use the word except for. Okay, except for whatever the GAAP problem is, omission of disclosure, they didn't account for something properly. You will say in your opinion paragraph, in my opinion, except for the shoes, my buddy's outfit is sufficient for the job interview. And you've called out what your issue is. Okay, question. Okay, good. Again, we don't have to sit here and rehash the structure of the report. If it's some other GAAP problem, whatever the GAAP problems are, you'll call them out and you'll describe them. That's the easy part, okay? The hard part, or the thing you gotta, it's not hard, but the thing you have to memorize, make sure you're comfortable with, is how do we modify the reports from the unmodified, which we do have memorized, to a qualification. The reasons will be very evident to you when you look at a question, okay? Now, adverse opinion happens when our GAAP problems go from bad to worse, okay? So let's just take a look and notice the big difference when we look at the actual example of the report. Come on. Did I lose you? You're still there, right?
Yes.
Okay. Something's happening. Something's happening. Are you still there?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, in here.
Flipping out on me a little bit here. And I don't know if it's because those cracks on my screen are finally taking their toll or what. But let me close this. Can you see you can see my screen, but it's frozen, right? So let me try this. Exit full screen. Hang on, guys. I think we're going to be okay. Quick little prayer to the PDF gods. Okay, good. All right. So what I want to do is I want to look at this right here. Okay. This is now the example of the adverse. Okay. Now notice a couple things here. And I don't want to even really ask you to flashcard the pattern here, because we're going to follow a pattern that is so similar to what we just did for the qualified that I'm just going to ask you to flashcard one important point here. Okay. So notice that introductory paragraph is the same, management's responsibility is the same. Auditor's responsibility is the same, except for instead of saying what? The basis for our, first it was just basis for our opinion, in the unmodified. In the qualified, it was basis for our qualified, and now it's basis for our what? For our adverse. So, I mean, that's somewhat simple of what you're supposed to do there, depending on the type of opinion you're giving. There's really no need to even flashcard that. If it's qualified, say qualified. If it's adverse, say it's adverse, right? Okay. Then you give the basis, and look, it can be, now you're saying, my buddy's wearing a whole sweat outfit, but it doesn't really change the nature. It's just that now you're describing something that's got you more than sad. It's got you crying. It's so bad, right? But it's still describing what it is. It's not like the structure of the description has to change. It's just that it's worse than what you would have if you were having to qualify the opinion, okay? And then the one thing I want you to flashcard is in the opinion paragraph, instead of saying except for, now you say because of. Okay, so flashcard, use because of language in the adverse. That's the main difference here between the, other than the fact that you call it the basis for my adverse opinion, you're calling out that it's an adverse opinion. The one kind of tricky thing you have to remember is don't use the word except for, use the words because of. Now, here's a kind of silly way or whatever to remember this. Let's say you and your significant other are having a talk about your relationship. And you say to them, you know, except for the time that you ignored me at that party, we have a great relationship. Please don't do that anymore, right? Or except for the time that you didn't call me and you came home late, we have a good relationship, right? So you're not dumping them, right? As opposed to, because of the fact that you cheated on me, this relationship is over, right? Okay, so it's a matter of what degree of significance, of pervasiveness of the problem, right? So because of is a more pointed, more angry kind of wording, more aggressive kind of wording, right? Than is except for. Okay, enough of that silly analogy, okay? All right, we're comfortable with that? Okay, good. So notice, guys, that, you know, the qualified versus the disclaimer doesn't, versus the adverse doesn't change that much, okay? Now, if we are talking about the issuer report, and let's just take a look at that, okay? When the auditor expresses, and now it's still qualified or adverse, notice that only the happy situation changes from non-issuer, unmodified to issuer, unqualified, right? Here, now we still use the terms qualified or adverse, and now the rule is that we will give an additional paragraph immediately following the opinion paragraph, and the opinion paragraph will be modified. Further, the auditor is not required to report a critical matters section when we give an adverse opinion. So I find that annoying, and that they make you go through all this trouble when everything's fine to find a critical matters. Then when everything is all effed up and you're going to adverse, then they say, okay, forget the critical matters. I mean, I swear they must have been hungry that night they came up with these things, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. But flashcard both of those requirements, and then let's go ahead and look at the pattern here, okay? So you have the opinion, then you have the additional paragraph. So it is kind of like the reason for qualification, but we don't call it that. Okay, the reason that we qualify, we saw that in the non-public company, they called it reason for qualification. Here, they just call it additional paragraph, okay? And then we still have the same basis same as the standard, and again, critical matters, assuming it's not adverse. Okay, so let's just do this. I think it's easier if we write in a flashcard down here. Flashcard pattern of qualified gap problem opinion for public companies. Let's just write it in. Okay, that says flashcard, and the flashcard is the pattern of the qualified gap problem opinion for public companies. Flashcard, the pattern of a qualified gap problem opinion for public companies. Okay. Okay, good. Now what happens? For the opinion paragraph, use except for language. Okay, and this is comparing it to what we would do for the unqualified opinion. In the opinion paragraph, we can't say the financial statements are free material statement. We'll say except for, and we'll say except for, and we'll say except for with the exception of, and reference the paragraph that discloses all of the qualified opinion, and that's going to point to that additional paragraph. So the opinion paragraph will say except for, then there'll be an additional paragraph. So let me just go ahead and number these. So the first paragraph is the opinion paragraph. The second paragraph is an additional paragraph. Okay, and it follows the opinion paragraph, and it's going to explain the reason for the qualification, even though we don't call it that. Okay, and then number 3 is going to be basis for opinion, and that's going to be same as, what's UQ? Same as unqualified. That doesn't change. Okay, and then 4 is my favorite thing. What? Critical matters, and that's same as UQ. UQ is unqualified. Okay, so you'll write you have memorized. I told you to memorize the way to write the qualified opinion for issuers for public companies. You've got that memorized, and then all you have to remember is, well, how should I alter that if my opinion is qualified for a gap problem? And in the opinion, use the except for language, except for, and what I'm about to tell you about. Then you add an additional paragraph that follows the opinion paragraph that explains what the problem is. Then you give your basis for your opinion, and your basis will be the same thing you memorize for the unqualified, and then the same thing you know about the critical matters is the same for the now qualified opinion for a public company. And I don't care the reasons. Again, they do that same thing. Well, here's what it looks like if it's disclosure. Here's what it looks like if it's material misstatement. I don't care. I need you to know the pattern, and I need you to be able to recognize when you have a gap problem versus what you would be doing if you had a gas problem. Okay? Okay, good. If it is an adverse opinion for a public company, the only thing I want you to remember is in the opinion part of the adverse report. I'm trying to get there, guys. Where's my adverse report now? Where'd my adverse report go? If it's an adverse, there's supposed to be a table here somewhere. They took it out. Okay, there used to be a table there. Am I missing a table for the adverse? Are you seeing a table for the adverse? There it is. Sorry, guys. Right here, the adverse, this table. All I want you to remember here is in the opinion paragraph. I see where I was looking in the wrong place. Is you have to use the word what? The phrase what? Because of. You use that more aggressive pointing language when you go to adverse for the non-public, just like you use because of for the public companies, just like you use because of for the non-public companies. Okay. All right, let's take a look at this question.
Oh, shoot. I think I chose the wrong one by accident.
That's all right.
Oh, my bad. I didn't know I was unmuted. I'm sorry.
It's all right. As long as you don't say something like, John Lordman's an idiot, you should be okay.
John Lord's the best.
There you go. Oh, sorry, I didn't know I was unmuted. I think it was Larry David had an episode of accidental on purpose text. So you accidentally text somebody saying how great you think they are, but you're really doing it on purpose. Then you say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to send you that.
I'm going to try that on somebody. Say, oh, I sent it to the wrong person. I'm sorry.
Yeah, see what happens. Just make sure, you don't like send the accidental wrong text to the wrong person, then you really start getting in trouble. Why did you send that person a text saying how much you loved them? Okay, guys, let's go ahead. Part of my problem is during the day when I've been at home, I watch way too many. See, that's them calling me saying, don't share that story. I have the problem that I watch too many court programs during the day. And the one that I watch all the time is paternity court. And when they're going to say, whether or not the kid belongs to somebody, they show this part where they go and they're taking DNA from the kid. They take DNA from the father, and then they take DNA from the mother. And I can never figure out, why are they taking DNA from the mother? It's clearly her kid. Anyway, unless the show's about a mix-up at the hospital. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at this next one. Okay, and yeah, the answer is C. Okay, and yeah, good. Okay, and except for is what makes this clearly the right answer. But let me go ahead and get this poll out of the way. Okay, but C is the right answer, and 78% of us got it right, so that's good. Except for is what makes this right, because what's happening? We're expressing a qualified opinion due to inadequate disclosure. That's a what? That's a gap issue. And when we have a gap issue, what do? We use the word except for in the what? In the, and we use that in the opinion paragraph. And then we describe that in the basis for the qualified opinion paragraph. That's the case for a non-issuer. If it's an issuer, the name of that paragraph is what? Explanatory paragraph. So that basis for qualified opinion thing is the only thing that made it relevant or specific to a non-issuer. If I said use except for the omission of except for in the opinion paragraph, then it could be issuer or non-issuer. So both of them use except for. What made this specific to a non-issuer is they said, as described in the basis for the qualified opinion, and the heading basis for qualified opinion is only relevant to non-issuers. For issuers, there is no heading to that paragraph. It's just an explanatory paragraph. Question? Matthew, did you get do you know why you got it wrong, or you just clicked the wrong one?
I thought I clicked the right answer. I highlighted the correct thing on my screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who said they got the wrong answer? Who called out that they had gotten the wrong answer?
I thought that was Cornelius, I think.
Oh, is it Cornelius? Cornelius, you see what happened there?
I'm sorry.
You had said before, oh, I marked the wrong answer. Do you know why now?
Oh, well, I thought I marked the wrong answer. It ended up being right. So if it would have picked the one that I tried to choose, I would have got it wrong.
What did you try to choose?
I tried to choose B.
Okay, yeah. It's except for, right? And then you point them to the part of the report where that's described. And in the case of the non-issuer, it's in the basis for the qualified opinion. In the case of the issuer, you'd say except for as coming in the following paragraph. Foregoing explanation is never correct. And you never use the term subject to. Question?
All right, noted.
Okay, guys, I think that's enough for today. We have a nice stop at a module, and I think it'll be worthwhile to pick up. I think it'll be good cadence here to pick up talking about what happens when you're having to modify the opinion due to gas issues. So we've dealt with this side of the grapefruit. When we come back on Monday, we'll come to the other side. In the meantime, you should be getting into the homework for modules 1 through 5 for this chapter 1, and registering for the exam. Okay, so don't forget that I have that paper that I need you to put together about your testing plan. And if you're not sure if you're eligible to sit for the exam, there's that worksheet that's on e-learning that you should be filling out with your classes. If you need help with that, you need to reach out to me. You know, it's not that hard to fill that thing out, but I know a couple little tricks is how to move some things around. And a lot of times students who think maybe they're missing some of the requirements find out that they actually have met everything. So make sure you're doing all that, registering for the exam, and starting to crack into this homework, okay? Questions?
Is there a date that if we still haven't received an email from Becker that we should let you know?
Yeah. Let me know tomorrow
Okay.
if you still haven't, because they told me outside the latest was going to be Thursday. Yeah, so I'll have to start slapping some people around if you don't have it, because I need you to work on this over the weekend, right?
Right.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so I'll start nagging if if they haven't gotten you the stuff yet.
Awesome.
Yeah, so look for it tomorrow. If let's cut it off at 10 o'clock. I think 10 o'clock Pacific is a good time to start complaining if we don't have it, okay? Tomorrow.
AM, of course, correct?
Yeah, AM, yep. Okay.
Yes. And you said about the homework. Where do we find it at?
The homework is inside of the Becker software. So if you haven't received that email yet and you don't have an account set up yet, you will have to wait before you can do what I'm about to show you. Okay, so once you get that email, they'll give you a link, and that link will take you and allow you to set up, oh, come on. What is this? Get rid of this. You still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. Let me try this again. Okay, so when you come over and you will click on the link they give you in the email that we're waiting for. And once you click on that link that they give you, you set up your account. And so you'll be, setting up your account here. I can't show you that part because I already have an account. But once you set up the account and you go in and you sign in, then I don't know what your account will be stuck on, but you can change it from the different parts of the class. You're going to do auditing, okay? And then you're going to go to A1, okay? And then in A1, see the different modules. So far we've covered, so you should be able to do module 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And when you click into the modules, okay, you will see, don't watch the lecture. You've sat through a lecture. It's not my lecture, it's the national lectures, and they're not that great. And so you don't need to watch the lecture. Do the skills practice, do the multiple choice questions, and there's a bunch of them in there. Well, 10 anyway. And so you'll begin the multiple choice questions, and you'll go in and you'll work through those. Green is good, yellow is bad. If you click the wrong answer, it'll turn yellow, okay? That's the multiple choice question part of the homework. And then, let's see, maybe let's go down to module 5. Well, let's look at unmodified opinions. So you click on that, and then you'll have some simulations that you should work to. You don't have the supplemental questions, and they'll try to sell you the supplemental questions. They were going to give us the supplemental questions as part of the package, and I talked them out of that and into giving us final review, because I think you get a lot more for your buck with the final review than you do these supplemental questions. And so for each module, skills practice, you don't have to watch the lecture, skills practice, multiple choice question, simulations, you don't have the supplemental questions. Okay, that's a lot of work. That's easily 4 to 5 hours of homework right there. Question? Okay, guys, good work. I will see you on Monday. Study hard this weekend. Okay. And we'll pick up where we left off on Monday. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.